World Cup? Like, before we got to 2026, how did the World Cup start?
So, the World Cup obviously is the symbol of football supremacy.
Right.
It's football's biggest spectacle. Yeah. So somebody might say it is golf's edition of the Masters or WWE's version of WrestleMania.
Yeah.
Before the World Cup, there used to be Olympic football, right? Uruguay had won in 1924 and 1928.
Yeah, the Olympic football.
Yes,
okay.
In 1924 and 1928. So a man from France called Jules Rimet, he was the president of FIFA from 1921 through to 1954. For 33 years, he helmed the football governing body, acronym FIFA.
Yeah.
And he decided that there has to be a tournament where nations would compete for a prized silverware. Right. So because Uruguay had won Olympic football title in 1924 and 1928, 2 years later, the idea of the FIFA World Cup came about. But before that, FIFA went for a congress in the Dutch capital, Amsterdam. And over there, a decision was taken that the World Cup would be staged. So, thanks to the ingenuity of Jules Rimet, the very first edition of the World Cup kicked off in 1930 on Uruguayan soil. So, Uruguay, which had won Olympic football title in 1924 and 1928, staged the very first edition of the FIFA World Cup in 1930, and that was to coincide with their independence anniversary. So 13 nations took part in the inaugural or maiden edition of the FIFA World Cup, and that tournament was held from July 13 through to July 30th, 1930. In the opening fixture, France beat Mexico 4-1 in the opening fixture.
Okay.
And the first ever player to score a World Cup goal was a Frenchman called Lucien Laurent. So viewers should take note of that. The first ever World Cup goal scorer was a man from France named Lucien Laurent.
Yeah.
Lucien, Lucien, Laurent, Laurent.
Right.
Then in the course of the tournament, through to the grand finale, Estadio Centenario. Estadio Centenario, interpreted in English as Centenary Stadium.
Yeah.
That is where the final of the World Cup was played, the very first edition, and Uruguay, Los Charruas or La Celeste, ran out convincing 4-2 winners.
All right, so Uruguay hosted and won the first ever World Cup.
the very first edition.
Brilliant. So let's and then after that, at that time, was it 4 years, or it was 1 year?
Well, the decision was taken that the World Cup be staged every 4 years. So
from the
after
first
19, yes, from
okay.
1930. We had the 1934 edition.
Brilliant.
Then we had the 1938. Mexico and the United States.
Before that, before we come to the one that we're going to play today, let's look at the winners. So what do I say? Uruguay won the first edition and then subsequent editions. Till now, then we move on. So after the 4 years later, who won?
So 4 years later, Italy hosted the tournament and won.
Okay. So the first edition was how many teams?
13
teams, and then Uruguay won the first one.
Then in 1934, Italy won. 1938 they won.
Okay.
So Italy became the first nation to win back-to-back tournaments.
Okay.
So in 1950, there was supposed to be events preceding that, but the Second World War broke out.
Yeah.
So when the war ended in 1945, interestingly, in 1946, we were supposed to have a FIFA World Cup, but it couldn't materialize because nations, had to recover from crippling war debt and had to bounce back economically. So, in 1950, Brazil had the opportunity to host the World Cup. And guess what? In the final, Brazil played Uruguay at a packed-capacity Maracanã Stadium in Rio de Janeiro. And Uruguay, which was then populated by 3 million people, stand Brazil in the final. So Uruguay became the second country after Italy to win the competition twice, but not on back-to-back basis. So in 1950, Uruguay won the second title, and as it stands, they are the only nation never to lose the World Cup final. In 1930, they won, they hosted and won. In 1950, they stunned Brazil, which hosted the tournament. Then in 1954, Switzerland hosted the tournament.
Okay.
And the best team, arguably, in the world at the time, the magical Magyars of Hungary, parading the likes of Ferenc Puskás, Zoltán Csibor, and all those galaxy of stars. I mean, they made it to the final. Everybody thought that the magical magics of Hungary, who had a top scorer in Sandor Kocsis. He had netted 11 goals. They met Germany in the final. And interestingly, before they clashed in the grand finale, Hungary had defeated Germany 8-3.
In the same tournament?
Yes, in the same tournament. But in the final, a different script was written. So the Germans were 3-2 winners.
Okay.
The Germans won their first title on Swiss soil in 1954. Then in 1958, Sweden hosted the tournament. Sweden hosted the tournament and they had an English coach called George Sidney Rayner. So when they made it to the final, expectations were high that given the fact that Italy had hosted and won, Sweden were going to follow suit. But Brazil, the Seleção featuring the 17-year-old Edson Arantes do Nascimento, aka Pelé, stunned the Swedish on home soil. They played the final in their capital, Stockholm, and Brazil heavily defeated Sweden 5-2.
That's where Brazil's dominance.
That's where their dominance started. And you know what? This one is free apple. Europe came up with a conspiracy that they couldn't come to terms with why they should stage the World Cup tournament for a Latin American country to win it.
Okay.
So they decided that if we will host it, we would host and win. So Brazil took the trophy to Brasilia. You know, Pelé, he scored arguably one of the finest goals in the World Cup final. And for the first time, the Brazilians started their dominance. So in 1962, Chile hosted a tournament. And the Brazilians won it again, becoming the second team after Italy to win back-to-back titles. Because the Italians did it in 1934 and 1938. So 1958, 1962, Brazil followed suit. In fact, they were bidding to become the only nation to win it thrice on the trot. And like I predicted, England staged the tournament for the first time in 1966.
In Europe, and then...
So unfortunately, the Brazilians couldn't defend the title because Pelé, who was the megastar of the team, became a subject of rough play. So he even decided that the next tournament he was going to boycott. So Pelé had won the tournament as an individual player in 1958 and 1962. But because he was a subject of rough play in 1966, when the Brazilians obviously couldn't defend the title, he said next 4 years he wasn't going to play. So England hosted the tournament for the very first time, and I am particularly concerned about this because we are going to face them.
Yeah.
The Three Lions met a tried and tested Germany in the final. The Germans had won.
Europeans in the final this time around.
They had won on Swiss soil in 1954. So this time around, they wanted to prove a point, and they had a young player. In fact, he was voted the best young player at that tournament, Franz Beckenbauer, in defense. Now, England, obviously brought on by home fans, beat Germany 4-2, and the World Cup was televised. The entire world saw it. The then British Prime Minister James Harold Wilson and Queen Elizabeth II were in attendance, and they joyfully or splendidly handed over the trophy to Bobby Moore.
Let's move forward. So at what point did Brazil win the fourth time that the trophy has to be changed, and the other?
Yes, so it was the 1970 edition.
Right.
Just like the Black Stars. That is why Ghana is referred to as the Brazil of Africa, because we secured permanent custodianship of the first Nations Cup trophy in 1978. We won it for keeps. So in 1970, the Brazilians did same when they won the original trophy. The original trophy was not what you see now.
I think the initial video that was played, and maybe
so the original trophy had a lady. A lady, you know, visible, as we don't have here. So in 1966, when the Three Lions of England beat Germany 4-2 in the final, 1970, Mexico, which is one of the co-hosts for this year's edition, hosted a tournament for the very first time. And Brazil, coached by Mario Zagallo. Mario Zagallo, of blessed memory himself, was a winner in 1958 as a player with the Seleção. But this time he was in the dugout as the coach. They came up against European champions, Italy. The Italians had won the Euros 2 years later. So, you know, the Italians and their catenaccio, obviously, they will sit, conserve energy and defend. But in this time, they couldn't withstand the attacking prowess of the Brazilians. In fact, many have touted this Brazilian team as the greatest team of all time, because in qualifying for the tournament, they won all their qualifying fixtures. And when the tournament got underway, Microsoft Encarta described this team as the greatest ever because they played with seamless quality and telepathic understanding. From the 7th to the 11th player on the pitch, they were all brilliant. You know, as I speak, I think it's Jairzinho who is still alive. They had Pelé, they had Carlos Alberto, they had Rivellino, they had Jairzinho himself. And they were so splendid on the pitch. So in the final, they defeated Italy 4-1. And the final goal, which was scored by their captain, Carlos Alberto, has been rated as one of the finest goals ever scored in the World Cup final. Because if you look at the build-up to the goal, it was so solid.
Let's come to maybe the modern, the Gen Z era, maybe like the modern era, from the early 2002 coming to 2022. Then we move on to the next topic.
Okay, so when the Brazilians won in 1970, they secured permanent custodianship of the Jules Rimet Trophy. So we needed to design a new one. The new one needed to be designed. And this one, interestingly, what happened was that at a point, the original trophy got stolen.
From Brazil?
Yes. Some people stole it. So it took a dog called Pickles. Pickles was able to retrieve the trophy, and that dog is deceased now, but, you know, became an instant hero in World Cup folklore because thanks to that dog, they were able to retrieve the original trophy. And that's history, by the way. So Brazil had won it in 1917. 1974, Germany also won. They hosted and won. And they came up against the best team at the time, the Clockwork Oranje of the Netherlands. Because in 1971, 1972, 1973, AFC Ajax had won the then European Cup, now UEFA Champions League, thrice on the trot. So going into the World Cup, I mean, they had all the best players you can think of. Johan Cruyff was their skipper. And interestingly, something happened in the final. When they kick-started the game, they built up to the goal. There was no German contact. Back.
Straight into the net.
Then somebody, I think it was Betty Vogt, you know, there was this minimal contact with Johan Cruyff. Then the referee pointed to the spot. So the Germans didn't have a kick of the ball. It was just the Dutch doing their own thing. They didn't have to then there was a penalty. And then the referee pointed to the spot. Then the Dutch scored. But the Germans equalized through a penalty, and subsequently they found the winner. So they hosted and won the tournament like the Uruguayans had done in 1930, the Italians had done in 1934, then the English had done in 1966. The 1978, it was the turn of Argentina. They also hosted and won. I mean, this tournament came with its own level, stories of controversy. At a point, some people said they were going to boycott because Argentina then was under a military dictatorship, and the military dictatorship were taking advantage, you know, to use this tournament
to whitewash
their image. But it still went ahead and Argentina won. Then in 1982, Spain hosted, Italy won. 1986, Mexico hosted for the second time. In fact, it was originally supposed to be hosted by Colombia, but for some reason, FIFA awarded the hosting rights to Mexico. Mexico hosted and Argentina won, beating then West Germany 3-2 in the final. 1990, Italy hosted the tournament, and I was very young at the time, but there was something fascinating about that tournament because for the very first time, an African team made it to the round of 8, the quarterfinal. It was historic and unprecedented. But before this African team could achieve this rare feat, they had a player who was past his prime, a certain Roger Miller. In fact, he was called out of retirement to feature for the national team. So if Andre Morgan Rami Ayew is listening, maybe he could be called out of retirement to have his last dance. He's not retired from football, but he's not competitive. But we can easily call him out of retirement to have his last dance with the Black Stars. Yeah, so Roger Miller proceeded out of retirement thanks to the intervention of President Paul Biya.
And then they went to the
quarterfinal,
so
to be defeated by England.
They moved to 1994. Who was that?
They moved to 1994. The United States of America, which is one of the nations hosting this edition, hosted in 1994, and Brazil went all the way to the final. They beat Italy on penalties. So
and then they won.
Brazil met Italy for the second time.
The finals.
Yes, because they had met in 1970. So 90. I was thinking the Italians would have avenged that defeat, but unfortunately, a certain Roberto Baggio missed the decisive kick, and the Brazilians were winners. Then 4 years down the line, we saw the emergence of a raw talent. He was of African ancestry, but decided to feature for Le Bleu of France. Zinedine Zidane. Yeah. So France also hosted and won. You know, that tradition of hosting and winning.
Yeah,
France emulated what the Uruguayans did in 1930, the Italians did in 1934, the English did in 1966,
right.
and what the Argentines did in 1978. So France also hosted and won. Then for the first time ever, FIFA decided that the tournament should be hosted by two different nations. The World Cup had never been staged on Asian soil. So Japan and South Korea jointly hosted the tournament.
Yeah.
This time, we saw Brazil once again winning the tournament against a tried and tested German team.
Right.
It took a brace from Ronaldo Luis Nazario de Lima, not the one you and I know.
Yeah. What Ronaldo?
Yeah. El Fenomeno, you know, the phenomenon.
Yeah.
His brace secured Brazil their fifth title when they were handled by Luis Felipe Scolari. Okay. So the Brazilians won, and 4 years later, something happened. There was a surprise package at the World Cup, because after the previous edition, where a certain Senegal had become the second African team after Cameroon to reach the quarterfinal, all the African teams which made it to the next edition on German soil
group stages
were predicted as, you know, they were just going to tour Germany and come back. In fact, I listened to some conversations, people who made some disparaging remarks about the African teams. Your friend El Hadji Diouf was one. That, oh, come on, if you look at these 5 African representatives, they're just going to tour Germany. Germany has fantastic tourist destinations, the Brandenburg Gate and what have you. They'll just come back. But we got to the World Cup and we saw what happened.
Ghana surprised everybody.
Yeah, Ghana surprised everybody.
That was Ghana's first World Cup.
That was Ghana's maiden edition. The Senegalese were there in 2002. They made it to the quarterfinal. But we could have made it a step further if we hadn't met Brazil.
We met one of the greatest teams in the world.
2006.
Ghana went there, but I think France went to the finals with
Italy,
and then Italy also beat France. That's when Zidane.
It was an unforgettable and historic World Cup.
And then 2006. Then we came to 2010. Second edition for the Black Stars. Ghana showed up in 2010.
Yeah, we showed up.
And that was the first time we're hosting a World Cup on African soil.
Yeah, for the first time we're hosting on an African soil. And it's been touted as one of the best anyway.
I think it was. Anything on African soil is great. So 2010, Spain won, right?
Yeah, Spain
went to the finals, and then
Spain defeated the Netherlands.
Exactly, and then 2014 Ghana was there in Brazil. Brazil hosted it again. It was a bad one, and
it was a bad one because Messi lost.
No, really, but makes it in terms of Ghana, not because Messi.
Yeah, Ghana was supposed to having settled for that 2-2 draw with Germany, which been touted as one of the best games ever. We're supposed to give up our best. We don't know what happened.